Hi, I'm Maggie. Welcome to Experiments in Crafting. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make this baby blanket out of a single ball of Premier's Parfait Layers. Parfait Layers is 100% polyester. It comes in 240 gram balls, and it comes in a bunch of kid-friendly or baby-friendly colors. I've done a full review of Parfait Layers on my channel, and if you want to check that out, there will be a link to the video in the description below. One of the things that I mentioned in the review is that Premier has a problem with Parfait Layers in that their colors are not always what they're supposed to be. When you buy a ball of Parfait Layers, it should have 3 colors repeated in order twice. So the pattern should be 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And one of the problems is that sometimes you get colors that are out of order. Sometimes there's colors that are missing. On the whole, the colors seem to be all there and all in the right order, but there were a number that were not. I originally started the tutorial with this ball of yarn. You can see I started working up the speckled row, and then I noticed that I had a problem. I had a speckled row, then purple, then pink, and then purple again, speckled, and then pink. So if I number these, I have 1, 2, 3, 2, 1, 3. Instead of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this really didn't work out for my tutorial, and when I went back to the store, I noticed that there were a number of balls that were like that. I'm going to be using this yarn, which is the colorway Bowl of Cherries, and you'll notice that it does have the right color pattern. So speckles, light pink, dark pink, speckles, light pink, dark pink. I'm going to be working this ball from the outside to the center. Normally when I work a caked yarn, I like to work from the outside to the center, but when I made this blanket, I worked from the center out because I didn't want the speckles to be my border row. Whatever your last color is going to be your border, and so in this case, it's going to be the dark pink is going to be my border. Premier recommends a K-hook, which is a 6.5 millimeter hook, and that's what I used for this blanket, and that's what I'm going to be using in this tutorial. So let's get started. Alright, to begin, I've got my K-hook, which is a 6.5 millimeter hook, a couple of stitch markers, and my ball of yarn with the label removed, and that's because I'm going to be working from the outside to the center, because I chose my center color to be the last color that I want to work with for my border row. In this case, if I wanted to work with this ball of yarn as it is, I either had to choose speckles or the dark pink as my border row, and I went with the dark pink. If you chain very tightly, you might consider going up to a 7 millimeter hook if you've got one in order to do your chain row, and that way it'll just be a little bit looser and it'll be a little bit more consistent for your blanket. That way you don't have a really tight chain row and make sort of a trapezoid shape with your blanket instead of a rectangle. Alright, the first step is to make a slip knot and put that slip knot onto your hook. And then I am going to chain 80. 80 works really well for this ball with the color changes of this size. If you're going to use a different color changing yarn, or you're going to use solid colors and change colors by yourself where you feel like changing them, then you can really chain any multiple of 2. But for the Parfait Layers, it works best with 80 for this baby blanket. I'm going to use stitch markers to mark every 20 chains. That way I don't have to keep going back to count. Alright, and I don't need this last stitch marker because I'm going to start working my next row. For this pattern, we're going to be working half double crochet, then chain 1, skip 1, and half double crochet. To set this pattern up, we're going to need to work a half double crochet into the 6th chain from the hook. In order to count your chains, especially with a speckled fuzzy yarn, it can be a little bit tricky, but I always just count the bottoms of my stitches, and that way I know where I'm supposed to be working. So you can see each stitch has a top piece and a bottom piece, and if you always count the same piece, then you know you're working into the right stitch. So I'm going to count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, and so that's where I'm going to be putting my half double crochet. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into that 6th chain, drop a loop, yarn over, and draw through all 3 loops on the hook. And I'll show you what we've done here. So what I've got here is 5 chains that are setting up this row. So 2 of these chains are a chain 1, skip 1. So there's the chain and there's the skipped chain. And then you have 3 chains left. 2 of them are pretending to be a half double crochet, and 1 of them is the chain under the half double crochet. So for this half double crochet, we have a chain underneath it. So over here, we need a chain underneath our half double crochet. And that sort of loop here on the end will make the pattern look right once we start working stitches into the next row. All right, so we've worked a half double crochet. We need to chain 1 and skip 1 chain. And when you work with a fuzzy yarn, and especially with the speckles, again, it can be really tricky to see where your stitches are at and where the stitches are that you're supposed to be skipping. So the best thing to do is, again, identify part of your stitch, and bottoms seem to work the best because you've sort of now covered the top of the stitch up with your half double crochet. So here is the bottom underneath the stitch that we made, which means the next bottom of the stitch is all the way over here. That's the one we're skipping. And so the next one is over here. And that can be pretty confusing to see because it looks like this should be the stitch that we're skipping, but we've actually already used this stitch. So there's the skip stitch, and there's the stitch that we're working into. So again, yarn over and insert your hook into the stitch. Yarn over and draw through all 3. Chain 1, skip 1 stitch. So there's the bottom that goes with the stitch I worked. There's the bottom of the stitch I'm skipping. There's the bottom of the stitch I'm working into. Insert your hook, drop a loop, and draw through all 3 loops on your hook. Chain 1. And as soon as I chain 1, I yarn over in anticipation of my next half double crochet, so I'm probably not saying that part. Insert your hook, drop a loop, yarn over, and draw through all 3 loops on your hook. And you're just going to continue this carefully down the row so that you don't skip extra stitches and that you don't miss a stitch and put 2 half double crochets right next to each other without skipping in between. So just work your way slowly and carefully down this row so that you don't have to rip your stitches out. This Premier Parfait Layers yarn can be a little bit tricky to pull stitches out, and that's true of any chenille yarn. This yarn is made of like string in between. There's little threads, and then there's little fuzzes held between the threads. And if you work your stitches tight, sometimes if you pull them out, you pull out the little fuzzes, and the string portion gets kind of tangled up with each other. So this is a yarn that you should try to avoid frogging if at all possible. And again, frogging means ripping your stitches out. It's sort of a play on words because of the rip it, we call it frogging. So, alright, I'm just going to work slowly down my row and meet up with you when it's time to start the next row. Alright, the last stitch can be a little bit tricky to work into, but just work your way in and make your very last half double crochet. And then it's a good idea to look over your first row and make sure that you didn't skip any spots or miss any chains where you've got big gaps or no gap. So mine look pretty even. but it's pretty easy to skip over a chain or to skip over 2 chains on accident. So, looks pretty good. So, the next thing I'm going to do, after I get my hook put back in, is start the next row. So you have 2 options when you start your next row. You can chain 2, turn your project, and then work a half double crochet into the top of this stitch here. Or you can do a standing stitch, which is my preferred method of starting a new row. And to do this, you pull up a loop the height of your double crochet, or your half double crochet, turn your project, then take your thumb and put it on your loop, tip your hook and drop it around the back side, yarn over, bring that loop around to the front, and then yarn over and draw through both loops. And that will make sort of a fake half double crochet. So now we have a half double crochet here on the edge, and we have one that's started. The next stitch is a chain stitch from the row below. We're going to half double crochet into that chain stitch. So you're going to have 2 half double crochets in a row. And then we are going to chain 1, skip the next half double crochet, and half double crochet into the next chain space. And we're going to continue this all the way down the row. Chain 1, skip 1 half double crochet, and work into the next chain space. And this will give us rows that are offset by 1. So you have half double crochets here, and on your next row your half double crochet is in the chain space in between. The only place that's a little bit different than the first row is the edge. So you have a half double crochet to start the row, and then a half double crochet is the next stitch, and there's no chain space in between them. And that is because you need a nice straight edge on the blanket to put your border into. It's also because there's no way to start with a chain space over this half double crochet. To do that, you would have to start up here, but your yarn is connected, so you can't just start out in space. So we make a half double crochet above this half double crochet. So I'm just going to work all the way down this row again, chaining 1 and skipping the half double crochet and working into the chain spaces. And this row is going to go a lot faster because I'm not working into the chains, I'm working around them. So when I put my hook in, I'm putting it into the space and not into the chain itself. This makes it go a lot faster. It's also makes it a lot easier to work with a fuzzy yarn like this when you work into chain spaces. You'll notice that many of my other crochet patterns where I've used a fuzzy yarn, I try and work into chain spaces as much as possible. So I'm just going to work all the way down this row, and again, this one's going to go a lot faster. So I've come up to the spot where we had the 5 chains that we skipped at the very beginning in the foundation row. So I'm going to work over the first chain with my half double crochet. And then I'm going to half double crochet into the next chain. And I'm not going to go around it, I'm going to go into it. And that'll straighten out this end part. So this is acting as a half double crochet. Try and pick up 2 loops of this stitch here. So now it kind of pulls this down a little bit and opens up this chain spot a little bit more so that it mimics the rest of the other stitches. And again, we did no chain between these 2 half double crochets, and that is because, again, this half double crochet, we would want this to be a chain space but we're using a half double crochet here, one, because you can't end on a chain stitch, and two, because this will give us a nice straight edge on our blanket. All right, so again, I'm ready to turn, and you can just chain 2 and then work a half double crochet into the first stitch, but I prefer to do this standing stitch. So to do that, you pull up a loop about the height of your half double crochet, turn your project, and then put your thumb on your loop, bring your hook down and around the back side, yarn over, and bring that loop back around to the front, yarn over, and draw through both loops. And that's a standing, that's actually the same technique for a standing double crochet. I just use a little bit shorter loop and make it a standing half double crochet. So at the beginning of this row, we've made a half double crochet. My next stitch is going to be a chain over this half double crochet. So chain, and then half double crochet into the next stitch. So again, we are just working chain 1, skip 1 stitch, half double crochet into the next chain space. And again, it's all the way down the row. And this is the whole pattern for this blanket. It's really easy to remember the pattern. You just have 2 different rows. So in one row, you're working 2 half double crochets next to each other. And in the next row, you're working a half double crochet and a chain. And in all cases, you're always working a half double crochet into a chain space and a chain over a half double crochet, except on the rows that would generally end in a chain. So if you followed the pattern half double crochet, chain, half double crochet, chain, you would want to end on a chain, which is not a possibility. You also can't start on a chain. So in those cases, we replace them with a half double crochet to give us this nice straight edge. And that's really the whole pattern, except for the border. So you work 5 colors. So in this case, I'm going to work the speckles, the light pink, the dark pink, this set of speckles, and this light pink. And when I get done with those 5 sections, I'm going to stop and start the border row with the dark pink, the very last section. Assuming that you have a good ball, like I talked about at the beginning, with all of the colors in the right order, this should work out for you. If you do run into problems, leave those in the comment section and I will do my best to help you out. I've reached the end of the 3rd row and I'm ready to work into the top of the standing half double crochet stitch that I made at the beginning of the 2nd row. And I just want to show you why these stitches are so nice. Instead of having chains here to work into, I have what looks like the top of a stitch, and it's got that characteristic V shape that tops of stitches have. So when I go to work into this, you just insert your hook under both loops, drop a loop, and then yarn over and draw through all 3 loops and just make a half double crochet. And that works just like a normal stitch. And so I'm ready to turn my row once again. I just draw up my loop, put my thumb on the loop, drop my hook and bring it around the back, yarn over and bring that loop around to the front, yarn over and draw through both loops. And again, this is a row that starts with a chain space here. So I'm going to not chain and instead work a half double crochet right next to that half double crochet. Next stitch is a half double crochet, so I'm going to chain and skip over it and work into the next chain space. So I'm just going to continue working on this speckled stripe and I will check back in at the first color change. Okay, I finished my first section, which is the speckly section, and I'm ready for my first color change. And what I just wanted to point out was that you should inspect your color changes to make sure that they seem secure. This does seem like a very nice join. They've sewn across the 2 colors very well, and it does feel pretty secure. On other yarns where they just take the 2 yarns and tie them together, you may want to consider cutting that section out and joining the two colors just like you would if you were working with two separate balls of yarn instead of one continuous ball. Alright, so all I have to do is draw up my loop, and it looks like this join is going to be hidden on this edge stitch here, which is nice. That won't always happen. Your joins are not always going to be at the very beginning of a row, and that's totally fine. If it just happens in the middle of a row, just keep working, and you'll notice it for a while. You'll be able to see where the color change is, but when you've got your finished blanket, those joins will just pretty much disappear into the pattern. Alright, so I'm just going to keep working, and when I get to my very last color change, I will come back and show you how to do the border row. Alright, so I'm just about done with my third section, and I noticed that I was getting close to switching to the speckles, but as I was working, I also noticed that there was a speckled section coming up, and I thought that I was at the end of my dark pink section, and I look over at my ball, and there's still a bunch of dark pink on there. So I unwrapped to see what was going on, and turns out that they put a speckled section of about 8 inches in between my dark pink section. So I don't know if they ran out of dark pink, and when they grabbed the next ball, it just started on speckled, and they didn't bother to just join the two dark pink sections together, or what happened, but I will be bringing this to Premier's attention, because this is really not acceptable to have, 4 stitches worth of speckled section in between a solid color. That just is really going to ruin the whole effect of the blanket. There'll just be like 3 stitches or 4 stitches right here that are the wrong color, and that's really going to draw the eye. So that's a pretty big mistake on their part. So like I said, I'll bring it to their attention, and I'll let you know what they say. In the meantime, I am going to finish the next 2 colors, and I'll let you know if there's any other issues there, and when I get to that last color, I will come back and show you how to do the edging. Alright, so as I was finishing up my blanket, I noticed that the center of my ball, this dark pink color that I had planned on using for the border, looked a little bit small. And that can be just because it's wrapped really tightly in the center, and so it's kind of hard to guess how much yarn is actually there. So what I did is I popped the center out of the ball and put it on my food scale that I use for weighing yarn, and it's only about 20 grams. And the ball that comes from Premier is 240 grams, and there should be 6 colors, which means that each color change should be about 40 grams. I think the problem is that because I have this section here that they clearly added on a new ball, I think what happened is I got extra dark pink in the middle and got shorted dark pink at the end. So my workaround for this is actually just going to be that I stopped working the light pink, and I'm going to start my border row with the light pink, and then I'll finish it with the dark pink. I've weighed out, this is just under 40 grams, which is just the size of what should be 1 color change. So it should be, each one of these should be 40 grams for a total of 240 grams for 6 colors. So if you're working this blanket with a yarn that's not Parfait Layers, I would recommend that you keep about 1/6 of your yarn for the border. So whatever your math works out to be, if you're working with, 200 grams, keep 1/6 of it. So, or in this case, it's 240, I'm keeping 1/6 of it, it's 40 grams. I'm going to get started on this border row. It's a pretty simple edging. The first row is just single crochet all the way around. And then the next row is single crochet in the front loop, chain 2, single crochet in the back loop, all the way around. And it gives a nice, really shallow, ruffly edge to the blanket. So no big, elaborate ruffles, so it works just fine for a baby boy. But it's just that enough interest to make the blanket look nice. So my ball's in a little bit rough shape because I've pulled the center out so many times, but it should work just fine. I'm going to pull off some yarn to get started on this border row. Okay, so this is my last stitch, and it looks like I've pulled it out here. So it was a half double crochet, chain 1, finish the row with a half double crochet. It's the last stitch I'm going to make there. Alright, I'm going to chain 1, turn my project, and I'm going to work down the edge. And this is along the edge that is half double crochets and standing half double crochets, or chains if you use chains instead of the standing stitches. So we're not working into the tops of stitches, we're just kind of working around the bar portion. So I'm just going to put 1 single crochet into each stitch along the edge here. And so I'm just inserting my hook underneath the bar and pulling up a loop. And by bar, I just mean the stick part rather than the top of a stitch. So just insert it into the gaps, and we're just going to single crochet all the way down this edge. Just to be clear, if you work chains instead of standing stitches on the edges, you're only putting 1 single crochet into the chain space, not 1 in each chain. So for half double crochet, you probably would have put 2 chains. Just put 1 half double crochet into that space, not 1 into each chain. Once you've made it a little way down, you should stop and check and make sure that you're not single crocheting too tightly and that this edge is laying pretty flat. If you start either missing stitches or crocheting too tightly, you're going to get like puckering, and you're not going to be able to block that out. You should pull it out and either single crochet a little bit more loosely or make sure that you're not missing stitches along the way. It can be very easy to skip the section here where you have half double crochet and then another half double crochet with no chain in between. There's nice open gaps here, but it's easy to skip over these more solid sections. So be careful that you don't do that. So I'm just going to keep working. I reached the corner, and this is the corner that's made up of all of the chains that we use to turn and start working back on the first row. So I'm going to put 1 single crochet in for the half double crochet. I'm going to put 1 in additional because it's the corner stitch. Then remember, we had a chain in here that was the bottom of the stitch. So I'm going to put that one into the actual chain space. So I'm actually going to pick up a loop and pull that one up. And then the next chain is the chain we skipped. So I'm going to put 1 in there. The next thing I come up to is the bottom side of a loop from a half double crochet. So we're going to single crochet in there. Next stitch is a skipped chain. You can either pick these stitches up or you can work around them. It's probably better to pick them up just so that the border row looks more even, because you're going to be picking up the stitches that your half double crochets are worked into. So just single crochet into each of the stitches here. I know that that corner is a little bit confusing because it's made of chains, but I ended up putting 4 single crochets in that big chain space. 2 along the side and 2 along the bottom, basically. And that'll make sense when we get to the other corner. So this row takes a little bit of time because you're working into chains and into the bottoms of stitches, and that's just a little bit more tedious. I've made it to the next corner, and this one will hopefully make a little bit more sense than the first one, since this one actually is stitches and not just all chains. So I'm going to work into the skipped chain here. Then into the bottom of the half double crochet. Then I'm going to turn and work up the side here. So I'm going to put one extra stitch in to turn the corner, and then one that actually goes in the side of this stitch. And so there's an extra stitch in here, just like we put an extra in this corner. It just felt like there were a lot over here. But there's just really one extra stitch over what you would normally be working. And so now that we're working back up a side that is made of half double crochets, it's just one single crochet in the edge of each stitch. And again, if you worked chains instead of half double crochets, you're still just going to put one into the chain space. Don't put one in each half double crochet. All right, I'm coming up on the next corner. So I'm putting one single crochet in the half double crochet, one to turn the corner, and then these are the tops of stitches, so I'm going to be working into just the top of the last row. So one single crochet into the top of the half double crochet, and one into the skipped chain. And then I'm just going to continue working into the tops of the stitches, into the half double crochet, and to the chain space, all the way down. I'm coming up on my last corner, and I'm going to single crochet into this half double crochet, single crochet into the chain space, single crochet into the last half double crochet, and then I need to put an extra stitch over here to round the corner. So I'm actually going to single crochet into that chain that I made at the very beginning. Single crochet there. And now I want to slip stitch into the very first single crochet that I made. Slip stitch and chain one, and then you're ready to begin the border row. One of the problems that I'm having right now is that I don't have enough light pink to go all the way around again. I really only have enough to do probably about 6 inches worth of border, and I don't really want 6 inches of light pink and then the entire rest of the blanket to be dark pink. So what I am going to do is cut the light pink and join the dark pink on so that I have a two-tone border. So I'll have a row of light pink all the way around in single crochet, and then a row of dark pink for the ruffly edge. You do not have to do this. If you have a good ball from Premier, you can just continue on working with the same color. If you're working with different yarn and you want to do a two-tone border, you can follow the instructions to join that I'm going to show you here in a second. But it's really up to you. You can do this in one color for both rows, or you can do it in 2 different colors like I'm going to. On the first blanket that I made, I had enough to go all the way around for the border in the same color. For this blanket, I don't, and so I'm just going to work with what I've got. So I'm going to snip this. And I'm going to snip this join. Clear away all my edges. All right. I'm going to wrap this guy back up a little bit, just because falling apart a little bit here. All right. So what I want to do is I'm going to pull out the chain stitch that I made and the slip stitch that I made. So again, if you are working this in a single color, you would have made a slip stitch and a chain, and you are ready to work your border. You don't have to follow this part. All right, so I'm going to pull my chain and my slip stitch out. And instead, I am going to make a slip knot. Insert my hook like I'm going to make a slip stitch, but instead of picking up the old color, I'm going to put the new slip knot onto my hook, cinch it up, and pull it through the loop on my hook. So we basically have just made a slip stitch, but we use the new color instead of the old color. And then to secure that, I'm going to chain 1. So now we're in exactly the same spot as if you didn't break and join a new color. We've made a slip stitch and we've chained 1. To start the next row of the border row, we're going to be working in front loops and back loops. The part of the stitch that's closest to you is the front loop, and the part of the stitch that is further away is the back loop. When you make a normal single crochet, you insert your hook under both loops. So there's the front loop and the back loop. Right there. To pick up just the front loop, you insert your hook under the first loop and into the center of the stitch. So instead of going to the back, we're going up between them into the center. To pick up only the back loop, you insert your hook into the center and go under the back one, out the back side of the stitch. So normal stitch, front loop, back loop. For this pattern, we're going to single crochet into the back loop, chain 2, single crochet into the front loop, chain 2, back loop, front loop, all the way around. And you don't have to do anything special to do the corners. We've already added the extra stitches, and the chains will help you round the corners without any puckering or bunching. So, single crochet into the back loop. We're going to draw up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, then chain 2. I'm going to insert my hook from the front into the center, drop a loop, finish my single crochet, and chain 2. Insert my hook in the center and to the back to pick up the back loop, single crochet, chain 2, then front loop. If you come across a pattern that wants you to do this, they'll often use the letters FLO and BLO for front loop only and back loop only. And this is what they want you to do. They want you to either pick up the front loops only or the back loops only. So we're just alternating all the way around this blanket. And that's the whole border. I'll work a few more stitches and then I'll show you how the border is coming along. So I think this gives it a really nice texture. It kind of has this wiggly shape. It's not a very feminine ruffle. It's not big and elaborate. The holes are nice and small. And I think it just gives it a little bit of something interesting to look at, but isn't too girly. It's kind of hard to find a nice neutral border for a baby blanket, and I think this one really does a nice job. So I'm just going to continue working all the way around. Single crochet in the front loops, chain 2, single crochet in the back loops, chain 2. And just work that all the way around, and I'll see you when I get to the last stitch. So I'm at my last stitch here, and this is the top of the slip knot that I made, and then the chain 1, and I am just going to slip stitch to the chain 1, and then chain 1, and And I actually only have a really tiny amount left, so I don't even need to snip this. I can just pull this through. And then using your thumb and your forefinger, tighten that up. And don't pull too hard because, again, this is a chenille style yarn that just has thread in the center, and so it's actually pretty easy to break. So just tighten that up. And if all went well, you should only have 2 ends to sew in, your beginning end and your very end tail. However, I ended up with 6 tails to sew in. So I've got my beginning and my end, plus the 2 from where I changed colors in the border. And then I have 2 here in the middle where I had that weird speckled section that I had to cut out so that I didn't have like 2 speckled stitches in the middle of this row. So I have these 2 ends, and a beginning and a very end. So I'm going to get those sewed in, and I'll come back and give you my thoughts on how the whole project went. Once you've got all your ends sewn in, you're done with your blanket. This is all I had left from one ball of Premier Parfait Layers, so I think that's really good yarn usage. The whole blanket turned out to be a nice size. I don't think it's too big or too small. It's soft and it's cuddly, and honestly, even though there were a couple of hiccups in the middle, one being that I couldn't do the border row in one color, and the other was that weird speckled section that was in the middle of my dark pink or rose-colored section. Other than that, honestly, it turned out just fine. I'm happy with the project. I think that Premier could do some improvement with their quality control at their mill, but really, I think the project turned out fine, and I think the recipient is going to be happy, and that's really the important part. If you work up this blanket, I would love for you to share it with me on Instagram or on Facebook at Experiments in Crafting. Let me know if you run into any problems with the Premier Parfait Layers or the tutorial itself. If you like this tutorial and you'd like to see more crafting content, hit subscribe. Thanks for watching.